Welcome to the Experienced, Unexperienced. No script, just experience.
Hi everyone, this is Eiko. I haven't really been active on social media. I haven't really been speaking much. It might be obvious to some people because I was hiding away from Hollywood because we were allegedly targeted. So I felt like I couldn't really speak because anything that I would say would be used against me, and I was also worried about being judged by other people about how I would be acting because, there's a stereotype on being the perfect victim. Now, people may expect me to be highly emotional or bitter or all these stereotypes. The way that I speak may not reflect other survivors, and I was worried that people would think that I was not affected or I was lying about it because I might be a little bit different from the average Me Too case because what happened to me didn't result into anything. So I just want to say thank you for the people who have been very supportive to me. And yeah, so this is the podcast, and we are talking about music versus film and talking about the film industry.
Okay, so the topic that you want to talk about today that came up today was actors versus musicians and giving versus taking in the arts.
I'm specifically talking about North American actors, those involved in Hollywood. The problem is that when it comes to actors, it just feels like they just want the attention they're taking. They're on talk shows that they're taking the energy. They just want praise, and when they're performing, they're always concerned about how they come across. It's really hard to explain. It's just a sense
Because you find it like an insecure art?
Yeah, I just feel like people who are attracted to Hollywood are attracted for the wrong reasons, for what comes with it. So the fame, the money, the power, the acolytes, because it's like the most prominent in-your-face industry in the world. Whereas I feel like with the other film industries, it's more, I would say it's more classical based. So I might be talking out my butt here because I don't know much
they're
about
classic. These are older societies, though. Talking to the UK, UK is an old society. America's not a very old society.
It feels like they don't really practice classical theater or do that.
Well, but you're going to go back for theater in America, you're going like Tennessee Williams, right? So, there are, okay, we're not going to get too much into it, but when you go to Britain, there's you're going back to William Shakespeare. So you have an indigenous acting tradition that's consistent, more like in Japan, or every culture kind of has their indigenous performing technique and has a longer history attached to it, while the American history is a bit shorter and the result of westward expansion. And so it kind of came up in a very unique dynamic. And so I think that does, that's part of the resistance in a lot of filmmakers' minds, is that mentality around, where California came from originally. And I think that's a big part of what you have issues with in Hollywood American filmmaking. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, because I come from a classical background when it comes to painting and music. It's a little bit harder though, because when it comes to music, it's regardless of if you have a classical background or not, if you're always serenading, you're always giving energy to people, regardless of if it's good energy, bad energy, toxic music, even depressing music can help people, right? Even teenagers. So in a way, I don't see any music as being that bad unless it has a bad message. Like some hip hop stuff, I'm very against. But they're still giving that energy to people, right?
But a lot of hip hop, you got to understand where it's coming from too differently too, and we've had this conversation with hip hop before. It's because I'm from Winnipeg. I've spent time in different parts of Winnipeg. I've been around, so you understand the relationship of hip hop to reality a bit more.
I'm just saying some hip hop, not all. Like, some of it has a really bad message. It's misogynistic and it's superficial and it's materialistic, which personally I don't think that's a good influence on children. And I understand how people would relate to that and they still pick up on that energy, but when it comes to the classical training kind of falls apart in this argument because I was trying to relate that back to myself being a classical trained artist and musician, but still, even if a person doesn't have that classical training with music, they can still give that energy. So I don't necessarily think that if you're classically trained as a musician that you're superior.
Yeah.
So,
But that's my point that I want to make on it, because hip hop is an indigenous art form. And that's kind of going back to my point where, like, you're talking in Britain, it's theater's an indigenous art form with a long history. Hip hop's an indigenous art form. Blues is an indigenous art form, right? Like, these are things that have come from, America, from the land, from these things, right?
I like blues.
I mean, the problem is, like, good acting, in my opinion. Sometimes the character takes, sometimes the character gives, and that depends on how you're trying to create the scene. But it's like, it's a mise en scène. It's an ensemble creation.
Okay, I'm not really talking about only the mere performance of it, because I
you don't like the publicity around it.
I don't like the actual person themselves. They might be a really good performer on camera. They can interact really well with other characters. They might portray that character accurately, but it's off screen that I feel that they're just trying to take.
So, but it's like, just to use, since we're talking hip hop, it's about keeping it real. It's different as a musician, authenticity is valued, while a performer, falsehood is valued.
Yes, exactly. So it's one
I've got
extreme
Play-Doh
than the
over
other.
here.
Huh?
I've got Play-Doh over here now.
So yeah, like, even pop music, I've never really been a huge pop music fan, but I can still feel that they're giving and people like it. There's a reason why it's so accessible to everyone. And a lot of people like it, right?
I just got to preface, I'm making the joke about Play-Doh because you're expressing similar opinions to acting as Play-Doh.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay. I think if you're not authentic with music, people can see that and they won't like it, because I've known a lot of musicians in my life. And then the ones that were coming from a inauthentic place were usually ones that got stuck, because other people could feel that, because people experience music on a more spiritual, emotional level than just film. I'm not saying that film can't do that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of film that are just, you just put it on the background because you're bored. It's nothing that really is, you don't really like sit there and experience every single form of film. But with the music, even on a subconscious level, you can feel it. It changes your mindset, it changes your emotion, it changes the energy of the room. So when it comes to music, even if you have emotions inside, right, you're expressing it out and other people can feel that, and just it's like you're serenading. You're always serenading. That's my opinion.
Okay, then I'm gonna throw a curveball at you. Does that mean you prefer methods like Stanislavski and substitution? So when you take real life experiences for acting and you put yourself in that circumstance and you channel real emotion to put it out there? Because that's method acting.
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it.
Because for me, when I think of method, I think of it more of it's more of a toxic environment, because to me, it's like film is about the crew and the team and about coming together to express a collective message. You know what I mean? So it's you're coordinating to do something based on a director's vision, ideally, like, and to come to express that. So you're assisting someone else in expressing that authenticity, because that's where kind of the director's voice comes in, the writer's voice comes in, right? The producer's voice comes in. And so a lead is unfortunately it's a marketing tool to get something made for a lot of the times, right? It's not that lead actors can't be great, but that there's a sense of name recognition divorced from authorship which is kind of in music, generally there's a greater tie to authorship, or at least song ownership, because you might like buy a song from someone or sing someone's song or get a songwriter, but you're owning that performance and that aspect of it. And so, but there's an acknowledgement of the writing credit, and there's an understanding of that kind of process. So how do you contrast that to like, an actor in a film trying to create a director's vision, which is, that direct emotional giving expression? So a director's not taking, like, I mean, you can't, like you look at a director's not, the director is giving something of themselves to the project and to the people through it.
Yeah, well, my criticism isn't against directors. I honestly think that the directors and the producers and the writers should be given more acknowledgement in society.
And I mean, I still defend actor sincerity, right? I mean, I think it's like, the Instagram followership where it's just like, it's reach versus message.
I think you're correct. I think it might be social media that might be one of the issues, because back in the day there were like household director names, like everyone knew who Steven Spielberg is,
so you don't
or
think
George
there's like
Lucas, or like Jim Henson, and now like all these new directors, listen, they're not household names anymore.
So you think that the status of the director has kind of dropped, and that's been damaging to filmmaking in general?
Yeah, because people are like saying, yeah, it's like Ryan Gosling film, not it's a
Spielberg film.
A Spielberg film.
Or whoever it is, like, what was it again? It's like 87 North is a company. Yeah.
So you can't even remember his name.
I can picture his face. No, that's me, because I picture faces before names. I could literally paint you the director's face and tell you all of his work, and I could actually mimic his voice. I could probably describe the salt and pepper in his facial hair, but sometimes I just see all the work in the person, and sometimes I forget the name because I see all the work at one time.
But would you ever forget like Steven Spielberg's
Well,
name?
it's because he's branded, right? David Leitch. Why would I forget that name? He shot Manitoba. I know David. I like David's work. Ugh,
But you see my point.
Monster. I see your point. It's that the big chair is taking a back seat.
Yes.
Yeah, but I can maybe argue that that's also why there's the death of the movie star, because it's like, with Tom Cruise, he's talking about he wants to make sure there's movie stars after him, and the thing is, there's not really been a lot of like movie stars for a long time since the shift in social media, because people will constantly inherit social media followers from every production they do. So every production they do, every big one, it keeps adding onto this big pile, and it makes it even more difficult to like have breakout performances and have that variety. And you really can only have these amazing performers if they're in a competitive circumstance. Like, nobody wants to watch football if like, one team has all their hands tied behind their back. It's not an exciting kind of process. And so you're saying just the competitive dynamic of things have shifted, and the way people understand the production of it has shifted so much. Is that about what you're saying?
Yeah, that's part of it.
Well, I mean, the issue is there's a lot of traps in filmmaking, and there's a lot of psychological traps. And I think just because, there's kind of been, after, Sex with Sue, there's kind of been that openness to non-monogamy and more complex forms of relationships. And so I think that was already kind of something that was happening in film as it was. And because, it's artists are usually on the edge of these things, edge of these new types of relationships and experimenting on them. But the issue is, I think that there's an institutionalization of them. And the institutionalization takes away that kind of like fun, like, bohemian, anarchist, I don't want to say anarchistic, but I'd say bohemian nature of the discipline. And I guess it comes down to it. Is it like, how do you feel about bohemianism and the nature of bohemianism in, the discipline, or like troubadourism? Like, how do you really feel about that, even as a historical concept? Because, I mean, those are old historical European concepts that did make the basis for like the modern actor and the modern filmmaker in Europe, right? Or is it just that everything is lost as bohemianism, and it's become, it's become a large commercial entity tied towards like influence marketing?
No, that could be it too. I guess the issue with film is that, actors are marketed a certain way of being good people, monogamous, like most of them,
Yeah.
the good guy. And it's the fact that they're not honest about that. They're not overt about that. Now, like with rock stars, everybody knows drugs and rock and roll.
Yeah.
They have, and I have no problem with that because it's overt. Like it's something that's normal in society.
It's the secret that you don't like.
Yeah, it's the secrets I don't like. And like I feel like everyone in Hollywood are secrets, especially the performers. And the fact that they market themselves as being so pure and like almost asexual in a way, there's nothing wrong to be promiscuous and like show that side to you. It's the fact that people are hiding it, like on purpose for a marketing thing.
Well, I mean, that's kind of been the tradition to market to, like, you're talking to a more conservative base in the U.S. And that's always kind of been there, though. I mean, that's been a consistent pattern of it, but it wasn't aligned with the same power structure. And that power structure is, a bit different. It's kind of funny. I watched old movie. I don't know how it holds up. I kind of just got a couple first minutes of it, but like Three Amigos with Steve Martin, Martin Short, right? And Chevy Chase, of course. But they're in front of this one producer, and they're, "You're actors, get out of here, you're nothing." And it kind of had that different power bohemian dynamic of actors struggling to exist even in that sphere. And so you've always have to look at the relationship between actors, studio, directors, because I mean, at a certain point you have like Alfred Hitchcock, who was tormenting some poor woman with the birds. You know what I mean? You have like Shelley Duvall, like in Kubrick, right? You have Hitchcock saying like, "I see actors as cattle." And so that's when you get to that idea that you have all these people who come with big dreams of making it big. They come to an area and they want to become the next big deal, and that becomes the American mythos. People come into LA, they're trying to create that. I'm going to be a star, which is...
Now, my question is, what makes a person want to do that?
They probably don't know how much work it is, and all this stuff comes with it. Because if you think of it, you're like, man, that's...
But that desire of being a star, I have a hard time grasping that, because that's the last thing that I want.
Well, I guess you got to not feel important, to be honest. Like, it's a lot of work. I don't know what to say. And like, you got to feel, I guess, either self-important or not important enough to really want that. I mean, things come, they go, they are what they are. It's like, it's just a leaf floating in a river, right? It's not something you should stress about. But I don't know. That's things, because I don't actually understand that, because I like the concept of being able to express myself creatively and having great teams and having those opportunities, and those things are important to me. But I'm not willing to do a lot of things to do that compromise my honor and my integrity, because it's no more important than my sense of self-worth or my sense of self-respect, because I'm too content with myself, I guess, to worry about that. So I don't know. Maybe it comes from a lack of contentment. Because, you think of people who have stars, like you go like Lohan or like Britney, and like the trouble they've had with it. And anyone who's grown up seeing the kind of trouble people can have with that situation should have some, reasonable concern about the add-on effects of that, right?
Yeah, you would think that any rational person
Would be like,
would be like, no.
It's going to be a lot of work. Yeah. No, fame's a ton of, like, notoriety is a ton of work, and I'm very, me, I'm very cautious about that. And I've always been cautious. That's probably why you put up with me.
Well, I value my privacy. I'm very private and secretive, and I'm not one to put myself out there. So this whole experience has been rather jarring for me.
Yeah, but that's a conversation you've been having that I think that has also limited how, your ability to express and give the art that you wanted to do.
Because I was thrown into Hollywood, which I was trying to avoid most of my life.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, it's like that Kurosawa film, Men Who Tread on the Tails of Tigers.
Can you elaborate?
Oh, it was a post-war film during occupation about how, everyone deals with, the evolving resistance to the social structures. And it's still one of Kurosawa. It's my favorite Kurosawa movie, I think. I love that movie so much. It says so much about how to handle things. I know it's the context of like the Imperial Japan, all their crap, but there's a thing in the I Ching. It's like, if you do things in that good way, you can tread on the tail of a tiger. And so that's, I guess, where we kind of have that conflict, because I'm like, well, sometimes you got to tread on the tail of a tiger, and Hollywood is a tiger's tail. If you step on it, you got to deal with it. And so you got to tread on the tail of the tiger.
Well, I was trying to avoid the tiger's den.
Yeah, but, it's a bit different. Sometimes you got to, like, it's a part of society, right? Like, you can't ignore that aspect of human existence in society if you're going to have a full and complete picture of reality.
There's a lot of people who could avoid it.
Yeah, but is avoidance really a moral choice?
Or there's a lot of people who want to be involved and they can't get into it.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the reason for that is it's like people who know they shouldn't be there tend to gatekeep, because they know if they let someone else in, they're going to get booted out.
That's true, but there's a lot of people who have, like, the standard regular life with, like, a 9-to-5 job,
yep,
with a family that they're supporting.
Little munchkins.
And they might have a desire to go into Hollywood, but they can't.
Yeah, but it's for the same thing, because it's like, you can idealize and avoid. I mean, you don't have to look at the substance of a thing when you imagine it. And the whole point is creating a lens of imagination. I think I've touched on this before, but the whole point of art, and that's what that, going back to Plato, is that, like, filmmaking and acting creates an unreality. Arguably with most music, I don't know if I'd say if you go into, like, power metal, where it's going to go or like Hoot Force or something, where they're going to be talking about a kind of a fantasy world, and you can kind of go off into that fantasy world, but there's still an authenticity. But I mean, coming from, like, Plato's comments on actors, they're lying about reality, right? How is it different than a band like Hoot Force, who, like, they have like a whole mythology and they're a whole concept album? What's different between what's the difference between a concept album and a play or a film? And that's where I kind of get with the Plato thing, because you seem to think that, like, music's okay, but why is a concept album different than a production?
Because if they're covering something that's that type of genre, it's still coming from an authentic place. If they're writing something about it, it's still coming from an authentic place. Usually performers, they get the script, they read it, and they say, okay. Or their agent tells them what to do because they'll increase their profile for their career. So it's a little bit more gray. There's probably some performers who are like, I really want to work with this person.
So you think it's an approval process?
Yes. Whereas with musicians, not everyone can compose music. So they would cover things, but they still choose to cover what they love.
But I guess because Hoot Force is not like a mainstream band, right? So, and like a lot of concept albums aren't exactly mainstream. So you're kind of saying it's the relationship of choice in production, and that because, you find, it's kind of funny. So, like, okay, story time. Long story. I met with this one really prominent agent out in BC, and we ended up being buddies for a while. And he's like, I would work with you on tech things, but as an actor, I don't know what to do with you. It's like, not some bad actors, because, we had that conversation. You want someone who's agreeable, who you can mold into your larger strategic and political purposes. So you need pawns. And then eventually pawns get dressed up as kinks.
And that's the issue that I have.
You don't like pawns dressed up as kinks?
Yeah. Yeah.
Enough, I guess.
Like, I have the utmost respect for directors.
Yep.
And writers and producers. But the performers are given more respect than them generally in society, because they're the faces that they see on screen.
Yeah, well, you can't really fantasize about a director that you don't see.
But it's their vision. They're the one creating it. The actors are just assisting that.
Yeah.
They're just, obviously, they worked at their craft. They took lessons. They practiced. So it's
Ideally.
it's still a talent. Like it's still a
So
skill.
I look at
but
like acting as an analytical process. So someone gives you a code of a character, and you have to look at the basic functions of the character, the motivations, like the sub-motivations, the more complex elements to it, and you basically break those down meticulously, as well as with the basic characterizations, the other aspects to it. So for me, it's like because I guess my background, I look at it like as an analyst, and so it's an analytical thing. And then you use that analytical planning and that pre-preparation. You get feedback and consent from like it was within the chain of command, which is, the director, the producer, things like this. You get that consent feedback, and then you go into the real world, into the real performance, and see what the other actor brings and the performance, the energy to it. And then you react to it to, make, no plan, battle survives the first engagement. So it's like, I treat acting like war.
now, is this a common way performers approach the script?
Probably not. Well, no, the methodology was what was taught to me, and but that's also inherited from British method, from like Penelope, my teacher. So she taught me that British method, which it creates that discourse and that chain of command necessarily.
So we're not really talking about the issues I have around Hollywood performers then, because I think British methodologies, like British shows, like I do like British comedies.
Yeah. But even with like Brockheimer, when I was working with Depp, what I liked, like he followed that methodology of like when, at least in presentation on set, he followed the proper chain of command on set.
Well, he actually feels like he gives, though. That's why he was so successful. I feel like British performers, because they did theater, they have to give energy to the audience, whereas Hollywood performers, they try to take.
It's trying to maintain as many eyes on you. When a theater, you have to deal with, and that's the thing. That's what, because like I said, I do have a theater background myself since I was a kid. I've done a lot of theater work, a lot of plays, and like locally here a lot. And yes, in performing to a crowd, maybe that's the thing. It's the crowd, and a lot of people talk about this. Is like, because you have to change your acting from a theater circumstance to a camera because it's more subtle. You don't have to be as loud and to project and change as much. But the fact that you're used to performing in that environment and you're used to actually having all that energy put on you and you have to do something with it, versus you can just take it and use it and just and use it to market. And you can just take all that energy and you don't actually have to be reciprocal because there's no expectations.
That's it. There's no synergy involved.
No.
Right. So
is that just the live performance aspect to it?
When it comes to music, not exactly, because a lot of people, they record in studios.
Yeah.
Yet they still have that energy coming out.
With an engineer yelling at them.
No, you have to be very nice to the artists. Like, if they want candles in the recording room, you supply them candles.
Beautiful candles.
Yeah. So the engineer's there to make sure that they don't upset the musicians, so they are in the right headspace to perform. So yeah, it might be the whole theater aspect.
You mean just that there's like been a time when you understood how to interact with real people? Because on one hand, if you're trying to there's something about a malleability and because people pleasing is usually a good trait for someone, because is it just because there's publicists in music, right? And they have a role in circumstances, even back to Elvis, you got the Colonel, you got those relationships that people have. And sometimes there can be power dynamics to it. And those power dynamic and relationships, is it just that professionals can kind of use, and this is something from, it's like the Young White Avatar. It was from, I think Atlanta, right? So, when you're talking about you create an avatar to get into a specific space. And so there's a lot of, say, producers or, publicists or agents who didn't have the looks or the vibe or the ability to put themselves in an acting role. So they use someone else as kind of a puppet attached to it. And so they become an extension of them. And so is it just that there's an industry that treats people as extensions? Because that's part of music where they treat someone like an extension. And there's a huge psychological aspect to it, especially in more pop music. Because I know we're coming from a very much more indie, authentic scene, because, that's what we've been accustomed to, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, because you do have that crossover of the same issues in pop music as you do when it comes to like pop acting, right? Because I mean, it's like, yeah, pop actors. Like there's kind of pop actors, and some are good, some of them, you know, some of them are really high level musicians, some of them aren't, right? Some of the high level actors, some of them aren't, and because there's a marketing scheme behind it, and there's people that are invested in them, and the issue is, was it just that investment, and it's the corporate aspect? Because I don't think corporatism itself is inherently bad to art. It's just about the relationship with it, because I think good art is always better when it comes to long term, and that's you find things like Die Hard, right? Like you get great films, and they still have to have a corporate relationship because it costs that much to make, but that balance between production, company, support, and distribution is what allows something to come out? Or is it just that there's so many different factors to what allows something good to come out? Like, I'm just trying to pinpoint what the real issue is with this, right? Because there's a lot of these things and people talk about it for a long time. And so where's the difference between, like, say, Justin Bieber versus another actor?
I wouldn't use Justin Bieber as an example.
You're right, because he started out very authentically in his own way. And
No, my point is that because Justin Bieber is good looking.
Yeah.
So my point is that you don't have to have a certain physical aspect to you to be a good musician for people to appreciate your music. A lot of people don't care what you look like.
so it's just that you find acting a bit vain.
A little bit, but there are like funny looking actors and they're successful. Like
Yeah.
Steve Buscemi, I think he's a talented actor, but he's not stereotypically like the leading man,
Yeah.
right? But in Hollywood, you have to have a certain look, even if it's like drop dead gorgeous or ugly, or you need to. It's very like surface level appearance industry when it comes to performance. Whereas with music, people generally don't care what you look like if you're a good musician.
I mean, but that's the criticism again when you get into pop, where it's more established, where you get like, you know, the development of other like supergroups and other concepts where it was determined for that to increase marketability because, you know, like modeling. People like, well, modeling's complicated because it's always about a distinct look. It's not always about
I think New Kids
attractiveness.
on the Block completely shifted the whole appearance thing with music.
Yeah.
Boy bands.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Like Beatles. They're not very good looking, but they're huge.
Yeah.
Some people would argue that they're a boy band, but they're not. In my opinion, they're not like, have the appearance of like New Kids on the Block or Boyz II Men or Backstreet Boy.
Okay, I'm going to get controversial because I'm going to hit on some Weinstein stuff. It's the trope. It's the fat where it's always a power dynamic over someone who had like youth or beauty and that kind of thing. And so it creates that trope. And so you can argue that maybe the issue you have is there's too many in film. Because you're criticizing, that's kind of thing with like New Kids on the Block and arguably NSYNC, but like it's the trope. Is that like, you know, there's Weinstein, there's some who is like using circumstance and power to kind of defile the performers. And so it's like there's that, it's like this devouring defiler, like, you know, it's like a Nurgle of sorts. So Nurgle's actually kind of chill.
Maybe it's more
but
that outside of Hollywood, you actually have to work at it, have discipline, and actually really train and prove yourself. Whereas in Hollywood, it's seemed as if more luck or favors, shortcuts.
Well, no, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That whole thing is the Hollywood trope. But I mean, it's still in the UK context. There's still a class context to it. And I mean, that's, like I said, that was one of the big differences I noticed, like in Germany when I was visiting versus the UK, and I found harsher, is just the class context was always a little bit sharper. And for whatever reason, right? But that class context in the UK, that's something you notice when you're there.
So do you believe that in the UK, performers have a certain standard that they have to follow because of the class system?
Well, there's a certain degree of expectations and decorum to get to a certain level. Yeah. So there's certain behavioral norms that are kind of established into it because of that, but then it still has, you know, a class element that you have to understand a relationship. And I'm not against like merited class, but I have issues with certain aspects of like limiting someone based upon something as simple as their skin color, right? And because one point skin color meant class. And so you kind of got to be conscious of that because, like, you know, it creates, because there is a benefit to a code of conduct that's largely established by your behaviors, but there's a difference to kind of an unfair gatekeeping elitism that doesn't allow people with merit to participate. And there is a tension between that, like, tradition and, you know, the more flexible class structures, but I don't know. I still think the right thing to do is do things in a good way, no matter what circumstance there is. And the issue is that things are not meant to be in a good way because you got people who don't actually have to put their face out there. And that's the thing. When you have publicists who don't have to put their face out there, it's a different time now because now there's some accountability for publicists. But, you know, if someone can kind of hide in the shadows and they can put people through things or put them into situations where they have little personal social consequences, they don't deal with it each day, they can, you know, use someone as functionally as an avatar. And they can make moral choices that they don't really have any responsibility for. And I actually think that that's a better understanding of Plato's criticism of acting. It's not, because I think it's a bit stretching about the unreality because you're just telling a story. You're communicating something in an emotional way, in a way that people can understand and somewhere they can kind of get a deeper grasp of. But with someone who doesn't have skin in the game, and this is that whole Talib kind of thing, right? It's like skin in the game. A publicist has many clients. They're going to send them through. They put people out. You can treat, in some ways, a publicist can act in a role similar to same with an agent. It can kind of have that same attribute to it. And so it is more so the fact that there's not enough of a prominent household reputation of agents and publicists so that the conduct of the people they put out there doesn't reflect on them as much as it should outside of small industry circles. And so I think that it's that dynamic that you have basically, it's like having a bunch of people in government that have no accountability and they're advising and directing policy. So you basically have people who are in the shadows without accountability that are guiding these individuals and can functionally treat them as disposable. And so you can take a performer and treat them as functionally disposable because that's kind of that's the argument happened with Lohan and Brittany, both Leslie Sloan's clients. People argue that, you know, they were pumped and dumped, right? That's the argument. That's the argument other people have made. And now we're back in this again with someone like Leslie Sloan. And this is not any comment about her because I don't want to comment about the ongoing case, but she is at the center of that debate about that aspect of culture. And you got to wonder because, you know what kind of decisions are people going to make on their own? They might not be right decisions, they might be perfect ones, but when someone's over their back and someone's being the PR mummies, as Taika put it, you know, who's actually underneath it if they're being authentic, right? And if someone who is trying to get clients to misrepresent themselves for their own personal interests, you know, it creates a bad dynamic. And maybe it's just that lack of dynamic for authenticity when it comes to PR and, you know, someone who's got a very strong personality who's hiding in the shadows. Because it's kind of like, it's like the ugly mummies. Like, not like there's like the ugly mummies. Like the devouring mother. Like, I don't want to get all too into it, but like, you know what I mean? In some ways, they're putting people out like that. And so it's that construct within it that I think might be what you have the biggest issue from. And I don't think a lot of people realize that that's where that comes from. Is it's not always women, and I'm not trying to be misogynistic, but like there's people behind the scenes who don't have to live with the consequences of their actions or discussion. And I think that's more pertinent than Plato's criticism of unreality with actors. It's that there's people now managing that process of unreality who have no real skin in the game and no real consequences, because reach has basically eclipsed them even further than it was before. And so you have large groups of people who don't have any social or functional checks on their behaviors or balances, and they can act completely within self-interest, even if it undermines the collective good. Do you think that kind of solidifies your objections and feelings about media in the U.S.?
It brings some clarity. I still don't like it.
Well, I don't like it. I mean, I will still want to do my best to kind of manage and mitigate it, because, you know, you're trying to make things work and be functional. But how do you even manage that aside from like developing codes of conduct and honor? And that comes down to it, like types of discipline. It's like you need certain institutional discipline, which I guess can only come from, additional codes of ethics, right? Like,
I think it might be more of the narcissistic behavior that I have a problem with, because I don't have an issue when it comes to animation 3D, 2D, because their face is not on there. They're more like seiyus, or voice actors in Japan. Ironically, voice actors are given more respect than actors in Japan. Acting is not really seen highly in the Japanese culture. So when it comes to 3D or voice acting, I have no issues with that.
But I mean, that's where we come from a cultural clash, because from a religious perspective, I'm coming from storytelling as like being a pillar of the community in law, and one of the most important undertakings, because it's about how the community understands itself and deals with itself. And that's, why there was so much issues in Canada about, the stories and the conversations being taken away and how you receive stories and everything like that. And, me sticking out and dealing with film is, for me, it's recapturing that, because it's evolved. And so for me, being loyal to my roots and who I am, that's why I'm in it doing that. But you know that. But there's still, it means you got to solve new problems. So.
Well, we might not have to worry in the future. Everything might just be replaced with AI.
I don't know if that's necessarily a better circumstance. That's almost like a permanent death to that aspect of my culture. So it's not something I'd necessarily be too glib about.
I'm not being glib. I'm just being realistic. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
No, I mean, it honestly, if you're going to get into there, it actually doesn't make it that difficult, because it does democratize storytelling in a lot of ways. It doesn't democratize distribution and access, which is another conversation entirely, but it does lower the bar substantially. But it also does mean the death of a tradition. And it's like Shirayama, right? Like, are you going to kill that tradition? Are you going to kill those years of British tradition? There's still plays and things like that, but I mean, you're in a circumstance where you could do a stage play black and white and just AI the whole thing. Like, that's what I mean. You could record it, do the angles, and you could just AI the whole thing, and then just reskin the whole thing like it was like a skin in Fortnite. And so that's a reality, and you can create film based on that, and emotions and creativity based on that, which is, fascinating as an experiment. But I mean, it's also, you want to still have the space of the real, being on location, having time with the crew, and like having all of those aspects. Like, there's something romantic about that I don't really want to give up. Like the stunts, the time, the people, man.
Well, I was more emotionally affected by the characters in like a sprite game like Final Fantasy VI. So it's not necessarily you need the actual human on screen to have that same emotional impact.
Yeah, but I guess the thing is, because I do come from somewhere where I've done theater and I've had those, like, there's a community aspect to it. And maybe it's just the community aspect is being stretched so much that maybe, just doing the stage plays now maybe that is the better idea. It's just doing a, basic black box theater and reskinning it. It was the only way to kind of keep that, because, at this point you can upgrade any kind of medium and it just comes to how it's marketed for release. But but it's a dehumanizing aspect.
Do you believe these A-listers with so much influence with the mass population are treated like they feel powerless within the system behind closed doors?
Yes, 110%. Yeah, I will tell you a million times, there's some of the people you think are the most powerful people. Internally, they feel extremely powerless and they can't do anything.
See, with me, I don't see that because of the that they put us through.
Allegedly.
I'm not naming names, so they don't know.
Well, no, but it has nothing to do with any specific. I'm saying if you hung out with enough, if you spend enough time with people, you'll find some people that really feel powerless and can't, they can't stand up for themselves. Because they've had people stand up for themselves for so long.
Yeah, they have influence by blacklisting people, by getting people to harass them, by...
Well, but that's how they feel. But that's the problem. That's usually how someone feels power. I mean, if you look at bullying, it's usually they're getting bullied at home, and it's that shared cycle of power. You know what I mean?
Point. Yeah.
And so you do have to understand that there is a bullying dynamic in the context of management.
So,
like, that's the whole thing. That's why people, like, that's what happened with Brittany. You know what I mean? That's why she was bullied.
Yeah,
right?
I feel really bad for her. They shouldn't have treated her like that.
But that's it, right?
Do you believe that we should not be fixing performers? We should be trying to fix the system that are treating them like...
Yeah, pretty much. I think you gotta have executives who know how to get things done, but they don't just fall into these old tropes. And I think that's just a modern executive at this point. And it's like a publicist. Like, these are old publicists. Like, these ways of thinking, these are like antiquated 90s, like, old publicists. These are not forward thinkers. These are not people who are part of the influence generation. There's a reason why a lot of actual influencers are still kind of really pushed out and don't really get to perform. You got to embrace the understanding of each generation that they bring. And you're looking at like Gen Zs and the way they're understanding things. And that's that new idea that, because every generation looks back on what happened and said, there's something I want to do a bit different. And I think at this time, it's just enduring a bit too long. And that's been a thing with the boomers, and that's kind of like the criticism, not to go after boomers, but like that's the criticism of intergenerational things where people don't kind of let other generations evolve, because every generation had some evolving understanding, right? And so it's people from older generations, they got to listen to the youth sometimes. You got to understand what it's from. That's like, the elders still got to give respect to the youth to understand what kind of unique insight. And I'm just going to say this in the context where this is taught to me at Sweat Lodge and stuff, like by like elders and things, but like, is that you listen to both elders and you listen to the youth because they're both closer to the creator. One just came and one is passing on. And so they both, and that's the same thing in even Taoism, where like best time for meditation is when you're young, when you're old, because you make the most progress because you're close to both ends. And so you have to understand to the wisdom for both ends, because it's the middle where there's a banality to it. Like there's either a new emergence or there's a setting. There's a setting or the closing sun. And so both of them have wisdom in itself. And it's important to remember the wisdom of the past and the setting, all these things, and like the great art that was done and the great way of thinking and the way of valuing things on set, but also learn on that new emergence and actually combine them. Because if you can create that in the middle, that's the sustaining, right? Because life is like, the Hindu concept of trimurti. It's like creation, sustaining, destruction. But that same thing. It's like sunrise, midday, and sunset. And all of those things have to be in balance with each other for things to be good. And so it's really about just people being more generous and fluid in understanding. And I think it is a class thing when it comes to people not respecting the young, people not respecting the old, and people not respecting in between.
But I feel like the people who are treating performers and other people like, I don't think they even have that little tiny drop of water of wisdom that you have.
Yeah, but for me, I kind of got to recognize, well, I grew up in Manitoba. I was taken to Sweat Lodge. I was taught by elders. I was educated in these things. And that's kind of what I was raised, the perspective is that a lot of these people, they just don't have the education.
So then how can it change?
Art. That's what film's for.
But then how can film do that if the system is being gatekept by these unwise owners?
Then, my dear, you got to do some rustling.
I feel like it's a little bit too much work because I don't even like watching film.
Yeehaw. But you do see the inherent value that I think is part of it, and how I relate that to because I see film the same way, because you're in a sweat. I don't tell you what happens in sweat, but you're in there. You see a story, you'll see it, you'll experience it. You experience visions, right? And films are visions.
That's what novels are for.
There's the difference is a novel I think the difference between a novel And because I don't get me wrong, I like reading, but a film puts you in the position of an observer.
A film strips you away from freedom and imagination.
Well, but that's the thing. I think this is where the debate comes in. It strips you away from control.
It strips you away from autonomy.
But I think you have a constant rejection of like autonomy and control. But like, yes, you're giving someone the ability to control your experience for a little bit. And that's a relationship built on trust.
I just find it really boring. Like a video game, you don't have control over the music or the artwork or the story.
Yeah, but you're controlling a care.
But you still have choices in it.
I know, but
you still have freedom. You can still walk around, like especially if there's an overworld.
I'm suddenly understanding that your issues with film is about control.
And a lot of film is just boring. Like I wasted so much time.
Yeah,
and
but
like
it's
I just feel like I'm held hostage on the couch. And like even theaters, that's the only place I can actually pay attention because I feel like I'm strapped in like one of those torture chairs and I can't go anywhere and I just have to stare like Clockwork Orange, stare at like the screen. And like if I take out my Switch or something and play during like the film, people yell at me, right? So I can't do that.
Yeah, no, I get you, but I mean, also, I'm going to go back to my experience, like, martial arts and stuff. Like, I'm used to being taught.
Well, I've had strict piano lessons where I had to practice 4 hours a day.
But then you're the one acting. Like, you've never really been in that storytelling culture, I think. Because, like, you hear, like, some of the old stories and people tell it to you. It's you listen because it's lessons and stuff, it's things to learn. And I mean, it's an aspect of that and trying to continue that because in a fragmented, modern, urbanized society.
You can read about it. You can read the lessons. You don't have to sit there and watch something.
It is not...
And have your full attention on something that's mundane and boring.
It is not the same because, while a book is great, you always have more control than a film. And when you're having a lesson and you're learning something, you're hearing that story, someone has curated it and prepared it and performed it and prepared and done it that way. It's like it's creating a place. Someone has taken the time to cultivate that and prepare that to you. You know what I mean? You got to respect the preparation, the time that they took to do it. And I guess that's it, is that it has additional meaning because it's like when someone wraps a gift for you. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, I love books. There's still that preparation aspect to it, but that's where the differentiation lies. So, and I mean, there's also a lot of combined visual arts that are involved in film, like a ton of combined visual artists. And so, it's like, it's a different medium in that way. And I mean, like I said, my emotional relationship is more traditionalist to it and not a more contemporary relationship to it. I think people don't tend to understand that about me, and I think that throws them for loops. Like, you must be jealous. You must be like this. Like he was going on about, like, you're just jealous. You're not. No, I don't like how any of this is done. I feel terrible about it. Please don't assume my opinion on things because I am very reserved about making people feel bad with things when it comes to that, unless they ask me and there's consent.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Like the jealousy thing. I'm jealous of Sakaguchi because he's amazing, but you know what I mean. Like
I don't care
film,
enough.
Like me jealous of film. Like come on, you know me. I ruin like every single film for you because I can't sit still. Like I talk through it and just like I cannot focus through a film.
Yeah, no, I know. I know. I don't want to get into that with that because it's like I know enough to be disappointed. And I think it's easier to process jealousy than disappointment. Because I actually want to see people live to their potential.
Sorry.
If you can't be a good actor if you don't look at reality, and if your defense mechanism for performance is they're jealous, they're this, that makes you a shitty actor.
But performers who do method acting.
Go ahead.
And a lot, and I don't know many performers, but I'm just making the assumption that a lot of them can't see reality because they're always not being true to themselves and seeing reality through the lens of the character that they're trying to play, if they're doing method acting.
Yeah.
Is that correct of an assumption?
I think some method actors can be kind of disconnected from reality, and then there's sometimes, I think that's kind of maybe I'm being too harsh on the publicists. Maybe that's where it comes from, is because you have a lot of method actors who are, had to be protected, right? Because in that state, they have to be protected. They're not able to cope with reality. And so I'm more of a true reality school of thought. And maintaining a grasp on reality while working in a character, maybe that protectiveness, because that was seen as like such a great autistic space, and that autistic space is just a integral part of society, and it just gets out of hand. It becomes different rationalizations. But like,
so the way that you're describing method actors, I might be wrong. I'm not a psychologist, but it seems as if you were saying that they're in full psychosis and they have to be protected, so they stay in that psychosis so they can perform. Is that correct?
In a nutshell, yeah. Yeah.
So in that case, would it seem as if some performers may seem as if they have dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder because of that psychosis of method acting?
I have experienced that on set at times, yes.
Not yourself, like other.
No, other people. No, I'm always like, flip on, flip off. It's a light switch. It's performing. It's like, it's no big deal.
So therefore, the public should be aware of that, how dangerous that is, and not give the people in that much power and influence.
Okay, hypothetical mid-range point. Maybe people shouldn't lie about it. Maybe trying to like brand someone like that as like something that they're not is super toxic to everybody and them themselves.
Yeah,
and then it's gonna come out in really weird ways.
Yeah,
like it's not the mental illness. It's not the mental illness of a performer that's the issue. It's the treatment of mental illness. And you're like, okay.
But it seems as if they're forcing themselves to go into mental illness. They're forcing themselves to go into psychosis with the method acting. Like maybe they don't actually have that.
Yes,
but the fact that they're using that method puts them into that situation of method acting.
I'm feeling more sympathetic, because say you're a publicist who had like maternal or paternal relationships with clients, and they went through like the pressures, and you saw them break down psychologically, and you tried and you failed. At a certain point, you blame yourself for not protecting them.
Fair point.
And then eventually you might harden up into doing things in a way where you just completely block that out as a protectiveness, and then you kind of slowly turn into a protectionistic monster that ends up causing harm to them and other people. And like, there's a lot of like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I'm like, you know what? Sometimes things just go wrong with it, and there's got a way to dial it back and work it out. And that's where healing circles come, because you can actually dial things back and kind of reset things, and not just like take things to like an end that's going to not serve anybody functionally. But what do I know? I'm just a half-breed. What's that?
Maybe the first thing to
She's
do.
skeptical.
Sorry, what?
She's skeptical of my conclusion.
Well, maybe the first way to start fixing the issue is to employ more of the Le Bon's way of acting rather than method acting. Maybe method acting is not the most healthy way of acting as a career, because it seems as if it might drive people into.
Well, yes. I don't know what to tell you. But that's my prejudice against it. You have to have a method actor defend their position, because you don't want to have an argument against it. I think that's a pretty good episode so far. What do you say?
Yeah, thank you everyone for staying to the end, and like and subscribe and follow us on social media and hit the alert bell so you stay tuned for any updates we have.
Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Always appreciate it, and we should have more soon. So
bye-bye. You're not going to say bye?
I don't say goodbye. I say hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. I don't know why you say goodbye. I say hello.